Is Epic the Musical a good adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey? That's what we're going to talk about today, and I am super excited to dive into this because, in case you couldn't tell by my merch, I love Epic the Musical. So that's a disclaimer right up front. I have been on board with Epic since the Underworld Saga. I love it as a concept and as a result. But that's not what we're talking about today. What we are talking about is if it is a good adaptation of the mythology of Homer's Odyssey. So, there are going to be three things that we are going to look at to determine this. First is uniqueness versus fidelity to the source material. Second is how it is in the medium. And third is how it brings the content to a whole nother audience. So, let's talk about uniqueness versus fidelity. If you are familiar with the Odyssey before listening to Epic the Musical, then you know that Jorge has done a lot of modifications to the plotline, themes, that sort of thing. So, in my opinion, what leads to a good adaptation is how the creator brings in their own unique flair to it while maintaining a fair bit of fidelity to the source material. So I don't mind so much that Jorge shifts some things around. He adds, Poseidon as a more upfront big bad. I think that lends itself well to his exploration of the themes of ruthlessness versus mercy, and that is something that he does really well in his adaptation. Now, I think a lot of adaptations have a tendency to stray way too far from their source material, and that can often be detrimental to it. I think that in the case of Epic, what Jorge does is really effective in maintaining the spirit of the Odyssey, this journey across 20 years and how it changes a man due to the circumstances that he encounters. That is done well. What could be done better is maintaining closer to the plot. I do think that some things could have been combined, maybe Scylla and Charybdis, which are together in the original Odyssey, and that's a pretty key part of the problem that Odysseus faces, is that he has to go between two really dangerous monsters, one that'll kill everybody and one that will only kill a couple if he lets them. And that is a dilemma I think could have been more explored better while maintaining higher fidelity to the original material. But I don't think it's terribly harmful that Jorge separates Scylla and Charybdis from each other in his adaptation. Because again, that's the thing about adaptation, is it is taking a known story and putting a twist to it that works, and that's something that Jorge does really well, is he makes it work for him. Now, most adaptations do need to be more faithful to their source material, in my opinion, unless they're going off of a inspired by, and that is what Jorge does here, is he says straight up that this is not a direct one-to-one The Odyssey, this is inspired by The Odyssey, and that's where I'm not going to dock him points as an adaptation, because he does not say it is a one-to-one adaptation. Now, let's talk about the medium. The choice of medium in a musical is very unique. I don't think it's been done before for the Odyssey, so it's cool. It's an original thing. It's not like a movie where the Odyssey's been adapted into movies over several years. We've even got one coming up in 2026 with Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. So I think that the medium lends itself very well to this story, because the Odyssey is very episodic, right? It's, we have this encounter, we have this encounter, we have this encounter. And what he does here is uses the songs to be those encounters. He comes to Calypso's island. That's a song. That's an encounter like we have in the Odyssey. The encounter with Scylla. Again, that's a very small episodic part of the Odyssey, and that's its own song. And that works very well in translating it to a new medium. So that's really done well. The third thing I wanted to talk about is how it brings the story to a different audience. If you're like me, you probably only read the Odyssey, if you did at all, because your schooling required it. Now, I loved the Odyssey despite having to read it for school because I'm a nerd and I love mythology, so I just ate it up. But a lot of people, their only exposure to the story of the Odyssey is it's required for a school assignment. And so what I love about this particular adaptation of Epic the Musical is that it brings this really cool story that has lasted for thousands of years at this point to a more modern audience, to kind of the, excuse my language, theater nerd, musical nerd type audience. And that is something that is really special, is how he's been able to do that and bring this story to a whole nother generation that would probably not care so much about the story if it weren't for the medium. And so I think that Epic the Musical is great as far as an adaptation goes. Could it be better? Could it have been more faithful to the story? Absolutely. But because Jorge said that it is inspired by the Odyssey, it's not a one-to-one thing, that I think lets it be a really good adaptation of the story of the Odyssey. So let me know what you think down below. Do you think Epic the Musical is a good adaptation? Of course, we can all probably agree it is great as content. Is it good as adaptation? So let me know your comments down below, and I will see you all in the next one.